Pokemon Go is a game that was sold on premise. It was showed off a few times in a bit more detail, but the concept of finding and catching Pokemon mapped onto the real world is enough for most people. It's like making a game where you repeatedly punch Donald Trump in the face. People aren't going to care about the finer details. I'm writing this in October. Sort it out, America. Though once the dust had settled and players worked out what kind of game they were playing, it soon became obvious that Pokemon Go wasn't as polished as first hoped. And if there's one thing that main series Pokemon games have been, except maybe Gen 1, it's polished. So today I've decided to talk about what features I'd like to see implemented into the app, and what I believe may help to improve the overall experience. I may be talking to an empty room at this stage since the excitement surrounding the game has died down a lot, but I still think the dedicated fans that are left deserve improvements to some key aspects of the app. Lord knows we need some good news. I guess a good place to start is with updates that almost certainly will be added to the game over time. Keywords in that sentence are almost and over time, because predicting Niantic's attitude towards keeping their stupidly successful project going is harder than you'd think. Naturally, we should gradually have new Pokemon fed into the game. Johto should just be around the corner, and if these new additions are frequent enough, maybe a new generation every 3 to 4 months is added, it might help keep players engaged. Sun and Moon comes out in a few weeks, which would leave Niantic with 6 more generations to add to the game. That's a lot to work with. The Pokemon Tracker, fix it, put it back in. It's too good to leave it out forever. Then there's trading, which shouldn't be too hard to work out. I was thinking how they could ensure that each trade was fair and that players weren't just trading Dragonites for Rattatas just to fill out the Pokedex. And I came up with some kind of CP equalization. Basically make it so that the CP values of the Pokemon on both sides are broadly the same. Maybe a 10% discrepancy so they don't have to be exact. We can hash this out later. Also one-on-one battling. There would have to be some kind of reward to it, since doing it for fun will wear off quickly. You could give out a bunch of experience and candy for the Pokemon involved, and how about including the trainer's allegiance in there somewhere? In the back of my mind there's a little voice screaming leaderboards, but the idea of a Pokemon leaderboard makes me slightly sick, so just throw candy at them instead. We all love the candy. And finally, whatever the fuck is going on with the legendaries and Ditto. It's all gone a bit quiet on this, but I was hearing that you'd be able to pick up Master Balls very rarely from Pokestops, and throwing these would be the only chance you had of catching legendaries. That's kinda cool, if a bit reliant on lots of stars to align perfectly for you, but if it takes away from the ball spam that catching the legendaries in the main series is known for, I really won't mind. Ditto's a strange entity though. Is it really that hard to implement this little guy? The only pitfall I can see is gym battles, and maybe Transform is a bit tricky to work around, but if push comes to shove, just make it so you can't use them in combat. Maybe Niantic have a higher purpose for Ditto, but somehow I doubt it. They don't strike me as a company that plan too far ahead. Pokemon Go is a house built on a foundation of an existing fanbase who'll lap up anything remotely related to Pokemon. But in order to keep them coming back, making progress in the app require extensive grinding is a suicidal tactic. Getting most things done in Pokemon Go hinges on how much candy you've got, and to put it simply, I think the game doesn't give you enough, or at least not from the right sources. It should work how like experience works in the main games, but since Pokemon don't get stronger in the same way, you need to feed them candy instead, which is kind of stupid. The only problem is that there aren't a lot of ways of getting this candy. Before the buddy feature came in, the only way to get it was from catching and hatching Pokemon, and from transferring any leftovers. The buddy Pokemon thing was a step in the right direction though. Reminds me a lot of the daycare in the main games where you can leave a Pokemon somewhere and after a lot of walking it'll be kinda strong. Sadly, the ratio of kilometers to candy is pretty abysmal. You can get a bit done with 1 kilometer Pokemon, but if you want a Dragonite without catching any more Dratinis and relying solely on this, I'll see you back here after 600 kilometers of walking, friend. Which is weird really, because it works a bit like how eggs do, but eggs are a much better way to go if you actually want to get things done. So this ratio needs sorting out. Maybe you can double the candy obtained every 10 kilometers you reach with the same Pokemon as some kind of loyalty bonus. Maybe every 15 kilometers if you want easier maths to divide by. The recent Halloween event was pretty good though. Buddy Pokemon gave you candy 4 times as often. Maybe not that far, but you know, something like that. And while we're at it, why not do something interesting with gyms? Don't know about you, but some of the best sources for training your Pokemon in the main series was slicing your way through a gym, pocketing all the experience you could pick up. So why not do that in Pokemon Go? Not experience, of course, we have candy in this game. Would it be so hard to award a small amount of relevant candy based on how many enemies each of your party members defeated? As it is now, the reward doesn't really line up with how Pokemon has worked for a long time, and I feel this small change would solve quite a lot of problems. Which brings me to the annoying elephant in the room that is catching evolved forms of Pokemon. Stronger Pokemon are harder to catch, that's easy enough to understand. But what isn't so clear is why you'd ever want to catch them. I mean, it has benefits if you're filling out the Pokedex, but just think about this scenario for a second. Catching a CP300 Kakuna is harder than a CP10 Weedle, because that makes loads of sense. But what incentive do you have to catch Pokemon that might burn through Pokeballs faster than others? It is stronger, but if you don't put it towards an evolution later and instead transfer it as soon as possible, there is no difference whatsoever between a strong Kakuna and a weak Weedle. Why would you catch a weaker version of an evolved Pokemon that you've already got? You get 3 candy and 1 candy either way for catching and transferring them respectively. My idea is that catching and transferring evolved Pokemon nets you more candy than the first stage of the evolution. Roughly something like this, based on how much candy is needed to get to that evolution, and something similar when transferring that Pokemon. This would need tweaking, but I feel like it would fix something. This game should be giving candy out like... I haven't really got any major issues with how Pokestops work since there's not a lot to them, and there doesn't need to be. Well, you could put a few more in rural areas, and I've got a lovely area just outside my house. Big fan of this tree, it's basically a landmark. I did think of a way of modifying Pokestops that helps give you the items that you want rather than whatever you end up with. Basically, you replace all of the Pokestop drops with Pokeyen or some other currency and turn every 1 in 4 Pokestops into a Pokemart. So rather than spinning the weird disc and tossing out 500 million revives when you need the bag space, you could just pick up some currency and spend it on whatever suits your playstyle. It'd be a big change that doesn't really need to be done, but I just thought I'd throw it out there. Keep them throwing out eggs though. I don't really want to have to buy eggs. That'd be weird. Oh, and hey, here's an idea. You know how gyms don't really have much of an incentive if they're friendly and full of Pokemon? So if you want to train and improve, you need to do a lot of training? Well, what if a friendly gym turns into a kind of Pokestop for players of that team? It could give out normal Pokestop items or maybe just some Stardust. If you don't have the time to train or just can't be bothered, it's an extra incentive to take and visit gyms. Not everyone is motivated by fighting. It's been well documented that the early stages of playing Pokemon Go was an experience akin to riding a slippery dolphin. Those brief moments where everything was working perfectly were outstanding, life-changing, inspiring. It just didn't happen often enough. But even through all of this, the thing that pissed me off the most was how you had to keep the app running for everything to work. If you wanted to walk around and hatch some eggs, you had to keep the app open and try and get whatever you want done before your phone has its battery life sucked away. Background functionality is an absolute must for a game like this, but I think the reason behind its absence can be traced to Pokemon Go Plus. I don't have it, so I can't pass too much judgment on it, but supposedly it lets you get kilometers for eggs and buddy Pokemon without the app being open. So the feature is there, but you need to part with more money to get it. Just sounds like more things that might not work. And you know what else would be great? If the menus weren't an absolute eyesore and weren't a pain to navigate. I don't want to be put off of transferring a lot of Pokemon at once just because there's no way of doing so without clumsily clicking on each Pokemon in turn. What you need to do is give them a tag. You know how you can favorite Pokemon? Something like that. Then if you want to transfer some Pokemon, you can do it 1 by 1 if you want, but there will also be a big button that says transfer that gets rid of all Pokemon with this tag on them. Maybe you could even sort by Pokemon with this tag next to the name so you can review what you're about to part company with. Maybe we could have a similar fix when using revives and potions on injured Pokemon. Healing up Pokemon after a grueling gym battle takes way too long. I want a way of selecting multiple Pokemon and using potions on them all at once. Again, maybe you could search by Pokemon with low HP to make this even easier. It's amazing what you can fix by just reworking some menus. So this is where I was going to conclude by saying that Pokemon Go isn't a lost cause as long as Niantic holds some kind of internal review of the app and listen to what their fans want. I even had this sick burn lined up for these Clash of Titans apps, but then, just before I started editing this, a new update came out for Pokemon Go. Arguably the worst update since the app's launch. They added a bonus for catching 1 Pokemon every day for a week, and the same for Pokestops, but at the cost of removing the chance for Pokestops to drop anything if you're travelling over a certain speed, designed to stop people playing it while driving, even though they already have something that shifts the legal responsibility. It feels like another attempt to stop people from getting the most out of the app. For a lot of people, including myself, picking up items as a passenger in a car or on a train is the only way to refill your inventory. After I completely run out of items, I'm not sure if I'll continue playing it. And I kept going even when the tracker and the battery saver stopped working. I can't blame anyone else if they follow suit. Niantic is starting to prove that they don't know what they want to do with Pokemon Go. Ultimately, while I can sit here giving advice on how to change things, I can't help something that refuses to help itself. Last one out, turn off the lights.